preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I want to welcome you to the 92nd Street Y. I'm Deborah Nadell McGee, Director of the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning here at the Y. And tonight's guest author, Stanley Crouch, has been a contributing editor to The New Republic, is an editorial columnist for the New York Daily News, and is a frequent panelist on television and radio talk shows. He is the author of Always in Pursuit, the All-American Skin Game, which was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award, and Notes of a Hanging Judge. For many years a staff writer for The Village Voice, he is artistic consultant to jazz at Lincoln Center and is a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship. He has recently published his first novel, Don't the Moon Look Lonesome. Tonight he will be in conversation with Daphne Merkin, who has always had an interest in writing and published her first piece in commentary when she was 21. She's the author of 2 books and recently published Dreaming of Hitler, a collection of essays. Her book and film reviews, essays, fiction, and cultural musings have appeared in, among other places, the New York Times Magazine, Book Review and Op-Ed page, Film Comment, Premiere, The New Republic, Mirabella, Harper's Bazaar, and on and on and on. She is currently a staff writer and book critic for The New Yorker, where she was formerly a movie critic. Following the discussion, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of our guests, and then there will be a book signing in the hall outside of this room. Just one moment to thank our sponsor for the evening, Talk Magazine, and also to beg your forgiveness for our construction project, which will hopefully be done sometime this millennium. For now, please join me in welcoming Stanley Crouch and Daphne Merkin. Thanks.
My notes.
That's good.
I think I wanted to ask you the obvious question, which is what prompted your move to fiction? I read somewhere that the Don't the Moon Look Lonesome started out as a short story, then a novella, and then grew to 546 pages. I also read that your novel was supposed to be First Snow in Kokomo. That was what you were working on once upon a time.
That's true, yeah. Well, what happened was I started writing fiction a long time ago, and I published a number of short fiction pieces in the Village Voice, a few other places, and I was working on this novel, First Snow in Kokomo, which was about the 60s. But I could never get the right form. I had a lot of, as they say, I had a lot of great stuff in it, perhaps, but I couldn't get the right form, so I abandoned it. I worked on it, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, who knows. I'd worked on a novel before that for 10 years, or 15. No, was it 10 or 15? Anyway, my first wife lost that one. So, it's out there somewhere. So this actually is the third. But I was working on this collection of short stories, and they were all very short. So I said, well, I should have a story that's longer for the end. So I planned to have a story about 10 pages, 15, maybe 30. And then it got to 30, and then it got to 50, then it got to 75, then it got to 100. I started saying, well, I don't know, is this still a short story? So then I was talking to my editor. I said, is this a short story or a novella? I said, how long is a novella? He said, oh, about 200 pages. So about 175, I knew that I was not going to end up at 200. So I said, I think this is going to be a short novel. He said, oh, okay. So then I finished it. I think the first finished version was maybe 350 pages. Then that wasn't enough. So then I went back and it ended about 400 pages. But then the problem was in the second half, the character, one of the main characters wasn't strong enough. So I had to go back at the advice of a friend named Nathan Scott and give more substance to that character. So when I gave that character more substance, then I had to, then everything was out of balance again. So I had to put a lot of other stuff in there to make those additions to his personality have more weight. So the upshot of it all is 546 pages.
Several people have asked me this, so I'll ask you it. As a jazz aficionado, however you pronounce that, and you yourself were a jazz drummer, right?
Right.
Did you try for a jazz quality of rhythm in the book? I mean, there's a lot about jazz, but within the language itself.
Yeah, I tried that, and there's a device I used in it over and over, which is a device that comes out of the blues. And that is, see, in the blues, a lot of times a person will be singing a song, and the song will be, I hate you, 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 for instance. Then at the very end, it'll say, I hate you because I love you. You know, so there are a number of situations in the book where somebody is saying something or seems to be doing something that's going in one direction, and just as you get there, it completely reverses, and you go, oh, that's not what I thought that was. So oftentimes that happens, but that's a device. I noticed that in many of the great blues lyrics are like that. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to use that kind of a device. And it works with people because, you know, a lot of times a person will be telling you something and you'll be listening, and if you listen to, where they end up is completely different from where they were taking.
Right.
And then other thing, the sentences, yeah, a lot, they're influenced by jazz rhythm, I think.
Right. What novelists do you admire? Right.
Well, the one I had most in mind when I was writing this, I think probably was Balzac, because I wanted to make the city of New York a character. Mm. And so, see, one of the main characters in the novel is New York City. And I always admired the fact that Balzac knew or seemed to know what everybody in Paris did. And if he introduced a person who had a particular profession, he didn't just introduce them because it would look interesting on the page to use the word waiter or police officer. If he introduced somebody, he knew where they lived, what they did on their job, literally, what the controversy, if there was a controversy about the kind of work that they did, and on and on. He always knew a great deal, and so I was always very, very struck by his work. And in this book, I wanted to take the reader. If I said somebody was a waitress, I wanted them to really know what that was.
Right.
You know.
I guess the other question that would occur to anyone reading this, especially in sort of these polarized times, is that you not only use a white protagonist, but a woman to boot, which interested me a lot because I know you have declared some impatience with feminism. I'm curious, like, why didn't you use a man, black or white, and I think you write extremely well about women, and in some ways, I think that's some of the heart of the book, but what did it allow you to do from your point of view, using a woman, a female protagonist?
Well, it allowed me to take a risk. So I'm the kind of a person who, I'm the kind of person who has these scars on myself from childhood because I would try to do something that I actually should not have been doing, and that would result in a catastrophe. Now, I've maintained that attitude throughout my life, and in this book I said, well, why not take a chance? Why not say, okay, write a book with a white person, then make it the character a white person from the Midwest, a Lutheran background, and so then once I was in that, then I said, okay, well, I have to try to bring this off. Because sometimes it's similar to when you're playing on a bandstand, a jazz band. You'll set something up, right, that you're trying to play, and then you have to make it sound good. So it can start out well, and you say, oh, now that was, and then you're stuck because the audience has heard it then. So you can't say, well, I would like to start over now. That's an idea I can't really develop, you know. So that was what happened with her. And also, I had luck because she took over.
Right.
So, you know, initially I thought I didn't know it was gonna be that she was gonna dominate. But then when she started to dominate, I said, okay, well, now that she's the dominant character, I have to make her work. So that I had to give her a childhood. I had to make her be one way when she was a teenager, and
right.
Later when she was in her early 20s. Then, when different things happened to her, I had to have her react different ways, and I had to figure out how the accumulated experience would come together in her as an adult, how she would talk once she grew up, you know, this sort of thing.
Right. I know yesterday your book was reviewed in the Times. I guess one would call it a mixed review. I don't know how you saw it. And the reviewer wrote a biography of James Baldwin, who you have criticized and written about yourself. But I wondered if the inspiration for the novel isn't in some way linked to Baldwin's observation that the story of the Negro in America is the story of America.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, but Constance Rourke figured that out before James Baldwin. That is to say that well, part of what the book is about is the idea that the United States is at one point, the character Carla, she thinks to herself, everything in America is American. And one woman read the book and she said that the thing that struck her most was that having been born in that hotbed of sedition, the Bay Area of Northern California, she never felt like an American. She always felt alienated, you know, at best connected to some cause that was in opposition to the government, the country. She wasn't an American. Well, she was born in Berkeley. So she told me that when she got to the end of the book made her actually feel as though she was an American. That this big enterprise spoke to and for her as much as it did for anybody else. And that's the big point of the book, is that here's this woman, blonde from South Dakota, who comes into the jazz world, and she has to find her own way in there. And as she travels through the jazz world and through a number of other worlds, she comes to see the Americanness of all of these things, that all of these things are just variations, one way or another, on stuff that she experienced when she was at home.
Right.
You know, even though South Dakota is not New York City nor Chicago, where she spent some time, she connects with her Americanness finally in all of these places. And so it doesn't make any difference whether she's with some Jews or some black people, Italians, et cetera. they're Americans. Then eventually she can recognize the connection that she has with them.
When you say they're Americans, I guess I read somewhere, I think it was a review of an earlier collection of essays, that your notion of America is, I don't know, he didn't use the word old-fashioned, dated, not applicable to the present. Do you think there's any, obviously you don't think there's any truth to that, but I mean, this seems like such separatist times. I mean, I think partly the book goes up against that in the dialogues. Did you have any, well, you don't seem riddled with anxiety about much, but did you wonder about how Black critics would take to the book?
No.
No.
Not at all. See, this is the thing. I feel like Americans, unless they're absolutely insane, and if they are absolutely insane, they're still often people who express connections to other people. For instance, you might see some film of some people in the white Aryan resistance, and they're drinking beer and eating fried chicken. And as it turns out, Negroes introduced fried chicken to the American menu, as it were, or brought that into American cuisine, because the Africans would often deep fry stuff in these big pots. And so eventually, okay, so you have these people over here who purportedly hate Black people and everything they do, right? And they're eating fried chicken, and they're listening to some white guy play some rock and roll that's an imitation of some other Black people that they saw. And the white guy and the Black guy may have a hairdo that's a straightened version of something that he saw Gorgeous George or some blonde wrestler wearing, right? And so that's how America works to me. That even you can, and I used to think about that often in the Nation of Islam with those guys. I would look at the things they were doing and listen to what they were saying, and it was so obvious that they had been, that even the way they reinvented Islam had a kind of an American wackiness to it, you know. So I just feel like that what this book will do to those who read it is it'll remind them of home, as it were. And because the American in this, see, you can be an American and be at home because of the nature of the American saga just about anywhere. Now, there are people in New York who become very outraged if they arrive someplace in the United States they can't find good bagels, but that's just New Yorkers. But Americans know about the Southwest. They know about the South. They know about the Pacific Northwest. And one of the things that Sergio Leone, the filmmaker, pointed out once was that the reason why American film speaks to the world at large so well is because the people in Hollywood had to figure out how to tell a story that if it was funny in Portland, it had to be funny in Miami. And you had to make people laugh in San Antonio, and you had to make them laugh in Bar Harbor. You had to make them laugh in New York City. You had to make them laugh in Detroit. You had to make them laugh in San Diego. You had to make them laugh in Phoenix. So when these guys were sitting up in these rooms, putting together these scripts, they had to figure out something that was so purely American that it didn't make any difference where you were when you went in the theater. You'd still like it, you know. And so what Leone was saying was that it's because the American tale spoke across so many different layers and variations on society, the rest of the world recognized it too because their story too was in there.
Right. It interested me that I know from conversations we've had and other things you've written that you pinpoint the 60s as the moment when the possibility of sort of more peaceful coexistence between blacks and whites kind of went awry.
Oh yeah, that was well, Black Power had arrived in 1966, and that was when the white people were kicked out of the civil rights movement, most of whom were Jews, as it turns out. I mean, so, and there's a big connection between the energetic involvement with Zionism that a number of young Jews had in the late 60s, and the fact that they had been thrown out of the civil rights movement. So there's a very interesting aspect to and also the whole identity politics, or what I sometimes call the politics of narcissism, come out of Black Power. So so there is a point in the book in which one of the characters is talking about the effect that being on these campuses with these black kids who were very hostile or pretended to be hostile to. See, that's the other part. Well, see, one of the things that the white character discovers is that a lot of the black hostility is fraudulent. You know, there's a scene in the book where the main character is taking the train to Brooklyn, and all these loud, obnoxious black kids come on there blasting radios, and they're all acting like they're threats to society or something. And she's sitting there, she's looking at them, and everybody in the train, of course, is, and then 4 guys come on the train who really are that. And the rest of them calm down and sit down and get quiet because they don't want in any way to make these guys, who they know are probably really armed and would take great relish in humiliating one of them or hurting them, to mistake any of them for a challenge to their authority in the world of real thugs. And it's at that point that she sees that this is a performance, you know, and it's a performance just like the white kids with the spiked hair, or the blue hair or the green hair and the you know, that's all the same thing. It's a fraud, and it's all based upon an idea of defining yourself through some form of defiance that might not really express how you feel. So throughout the book, she's constantly discovering these kinds of things about people, and also that if you stare at people long enough, if you listen closely enough, you'll usually hear that there's something under what they're saying that speaks to you and that tells you more about how things really work than what you're hearing on the top.
It interested me that you gave the views of college campuses to, didn't you give them to Ramona, the sister? She's the one who explains it.
Right.
And she belongs to the National Rifle Association.
Right.
Why did you give that sort of, not a statement, but that expression to her?
Well, because see, I've been on a number of these panels, and I'll bring up one of the reasons I think that there's static between black people and white people, and is that the people in my generation, I was born in 1945. People in my generation, and maybe from 1945 to 50, maybe 1945 to 55, that group right there, when that group of people went to college, right, and black studies and all that stuff came in the late 60s, that's when all of this stuff happened. And so as Ramona explains, one of the reasons why she hates black people is that she was around them 9 months a year for 4 years, day in, day out. And that they were bringing these anti-Semites on campus. They were bringing these people who claimed that they hated the United States, they wanted to kill all the white people, et cetera. That they were constantly hostile to the other white kids and very obnoxious one way or another, right? And so she says that unlike other people, liberals, right? She says they don't know any black people. She said they just know them in the abstract. You know, I know them literally. And she said, that's why I hate them, because I actually know what they're like. And then, but her racism is a complicated one, because her racism is not based on the idea that black people are innately inferior. She's convinced that black culture has evolved into just a form of hostile laziness. Because she says at one point, she says, no, they're not inferior. She says, they're just lazy and they won't work. You know, there's nothing wrong with them, nothing wrong with their brains, anything. They just run a game on us and those of us who can't see, and that's why they're doing what they're doing, you know. But then she also says that she and her husband, Bob, are running America right now. And she said, we didn't forget what happened. And she said, there are plenty of us out here.
Right.
You know, and we take care of business, and we never go to court. And they only get promoted so far, and if they don't like it, they quit, you know. So she's a lot more sinister than just people that like to hold their hand up in there like that, you know. So she's a more dangerous character, I think.
Yeah. But as you said, she's also complicated, which is interesting. So like, for a moment, she seems touching, and then you kind of realize she's, as you say, dangerous in the undercover way.
But I've always, I remember when I first came to New York, I was at the Village Voice, and people, Hitler's still a very big figure in New York, and people make they make a lot of those photographs of him where he's smiling and he's leaning over, shaking the hand of some little German boy or some little German girl, and there's always some ironic statement as though this actually couldn't be the real him. See, I contend that, when Hitler was up at the Eagle's Lair, I'm sure when he got up in the morning, it was a beautiful day. It looked pretty much the same to him as it did to anybody else. I think that on a great day when the air was crisp and all of that, I think the air felt probably pretty much the same being inhaled by him as it did by anybody else. That when the birds were chirping, I'm sure he looked up and said, my, what a wonderful day. Now, he was still, but none of that obviates him being a beast,
right,
about certain subjects. Because things I've read about him, apparently he was a good host, he was witty. And I think I think you always run a risk of not really understanding evil if you reduce the evil person to just 3 or 4 different characteristics. He hates black people, he hates women, he hates Jews, she hates Indian, whatever it is. Because they might also be great cooks and play tennis well, do a lot and brave.
Right.
And brave. That's one of the things when you study the Civil War. Now, that a lot of times you really will admire those Southern troops. Of course, I'm glad they lost, but you can't take that away from people. The German army, they were some hell of fighters. Until they got to Russia, they found something out they didn't want to find out. But they fought well. They were people. They just had a screwed up ideology. And see, one of the things the book is at war with is these simple-minded ideologies that people have about other people. That's why the book will be roundly hated in certain circles, because it doesn't say all the problems can be blamed on men.
Right.
They can all be blamed on women. They can all be blamed on the poor. They can all be blamed on the rich. They can all be blamed on the white people. They can all be blamed on the people who are not white, etc. The book's not going to let you the book won't do that. And so certain people feel it, and also because the book embraces American life, it will be bothersome to a lot of people because people feel today that you can't accept the problems of America. I mean, you can't be critical of America's varied problems and still love the country. But see, I do. I mean, see, I like Fred Astaire. You know, I like George Gershwin. I like Willie Mays. I like Orson Welles. I mean, I think Lyndon Johnson was great. I thought Ronald Reagan could be funny. I thought, I mean, there's so many things about the United States that have affected me. I think John Wayne was a great actor. People always go, oh, boo, you know. Edward G. Robinson, I mean, Sugar Ray Robinson. I mean, there's two Robinsons for you. And on it goes. You know, then the fact that, you know, this country came through slavery. I mean, the most remarkable thing probably about labor in the history of the Western world, other than Spartacus's rebellion during the Roman Empire, was the Civil War. 600,000 people died over the idea that you couldn't earn money based upon keeping people in chattel slavery, you know? I mean, so, and the thing, in the 19th century, early in the book when Carla is thinking, she remembers when she was a little girl and she used to imagine herself being a Lakota princess on horseback, right? On this ridge looking at all these buffalo down there. And at another time, she imagines herself being Annie Oakley. And another time, she imagines herself as Harriet Tubman, General Moses, spiriting slaves through the swamp, etc. Now I talked to a bunch of white women who imagined that, who were born around 1960. I mean, they didn't say, oh, I'm white, I can't imagine myself being Harriet Tubman.
Right.
And see, during the 60s, I remember one thing I remember when I was teaching school, there were these black girls who were sitting up one time and they were talking about how much they couldn't stand white people, right, in the dorm. I said, yeah, okay. And they had huge photographs of all the Beatles on the wall in their dorm, and they were listening to the Beatles, you know. And I was really fascinated by that. And they were just ranting and raving about how they couldn't stand white people, and there they were listening to the Beatles, and they had the Let It Bleed photographs of the Beatles. And I said, oh, okay, this is an interesting phenomenon here. You know, so that's what I think happens. I don't think we can really resist the best aspects of our humanity. I don't think any of us can really resist. We can try to, but I don't think we can do it. You know, I think that's the only reason why the species hasn't destroyed itself, is that in many ways we're just irresistible to each other when we have the opportunity to get close enough to find out what's going on. And it doesn't mean you have to melt into something else. You know, the melting pot thing, I don't really believe that happens exactly. But I do think that people do absorb each other.
My sense is about that your refusal to sort of be categorized. I think I read somewhere that you were, and you know, you've been described as a neoconservative henchman. You've also been described as a tough-minded, independent critic. But my sense is that your non-ideological take puzzles a lot of the people who read you, the critics, that they're always in a fix, like where should they place you?
Yeah, well, see, ideally that should be the identity of an American, really, is that none of us should be in a category, because a lot of times you're getting a category because you've already decided before you went to bed what you're going to think when you get up tomorrow. You know, see, my contention is that you can't assume that I mean, you never know. You never know. I mean, for instance, they used to have this routine on Saturday Night Live called Black Crime, White Crime. And so they'd say, guy snatches woman's pocketbook, runs out of Subway, black crime, right? Guy goes to post office, shoots 17 people, white crime, right? So when Colin Ferguson went on the train, the Long Island commuter train, and shot all those people, and when I first heard the name Colin, I said, Colin? I said, I don't know. I said, I know some Negroes named Colin, but I don't know any white people named Colin. And so then when I saw him come out with his hands behind him, and then later I said, oh, well, there we are. You know,
White crime, black perpetrator.
Right. And see, but then see, just the wackiness of America that's both hilarious and tragic is nothing in the history of American jurisprudence is like his trial, because he actually convinced those people that he could defend himself. So Colin Ferguson actually cross-examines the people he shot. You know, so he'll say, well, now, what did the man, excuse me, sir, now would you repeat again, what did the man who shot you look like? He said, he looked exactly like you because you came on the train and you shot me. He said, oh yes, well, but now did you hear my question? He said, yes, I did hear your question. He said, now could you tell the jury and everyone here what the person who shot you looked like? He said, and what that person, he said, well, I saw you, I was sitting there, I looked, and you took a gun out, and you aimed it at me, and you shot me, and you shot some other people. He said, are you sure? And then he goes on. Now, nothing like that has ever happened before. Of all the things that have happened in the American court system, that's never happened. But see, that's the United States to me too, is you can, and that's a lot of what the book is about too. The book hopes to give the reader the feeling of being in the United States, because you never really know where you're going. You know, it's almost, being an American is like getting on a train with a ticket to a particular place, and that's not necessarily where you go. You know? But now the place you go may not be bad, but it may not be where you thought you were going. You know?
In some way, isn't that reflected in the fact that you have changed your mind on the issue? I mean, you do not, over the years, you've changed your mind on some, I know even on some jazz musicians.
Yeah, now I'm getting ready to change it back.
On the jazz musicians?
Yeah, some of the people that I used to like, then I rejected them. Then I was listening to some of them recently. I said, well, I said, maybe they don't sound too bad. So probably by the end, I'll just like everybody.
In the true American grain. I found one part of the book, in some ways the book strikes me obviously as very romantic, very interested in men and women. And also, I guess, the mythology regarding black men, white women. You have a line, I mean, that I loved. I thought it was, you say, I forget who says this, along about now, that's the best female thing about integration, in and out of the jazz world. It helped ugly white women get handsome Negro men and ugly black women to get handsome white men.
Right.
Which is the sort of comment, I was gonna say you're known for, like.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, I guess so, probably. Yeah, well.
Somewhat provocative, funny.
True.
True.
I mean, see, that's one of the things that you find amazing about integration or integrated couples. So you'll see a kind of a guy of one color with a woman of the other color that you would never see a guy like that with a person of the same color. That is to say, you would never see
You would never see a
You
good-looking white woman.
with a certain kind, almost never. The kind of black guy she might be with, you would never see her with a white guy who looks like that. Unless she was a teenager and she was trying to do something to her parents, you know. But now, as an adult, she wouldn't necessarily care. And conversely, the same thing, you might see an extraordinarily handsome black guy with the kind of white woman that he wouldn't pick looks-wise if she was black. And that used to drive black women up the wall. They'd be like, look at this. I mean, look at white is like a free ride. You can just get anything with white. Just, you know, I remember once I was listening to these black women, one of them said, I bet a white woman could stick her arm out the window and a bunch of Negroes would be out there jumping up in the air like dogs or a piece of meat. If she was on the second floor and she just stuck her white arm out the window, they'd say, whoa, is that the arm of a white woman? I said, yeah, that's the arm of a white woman. My God, right? So,
What an arm.
yeah, I got to have it, you know. So that was what they thought, you know. Now, there are those kinds of things are toyed with in the book. And at the same time, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the fact that race, which is often seen in a very simple-minded manner, it can be extraordinarily complex. And my idea is that a work that focuses on race shouldn't be any less complex than any other work, because if it's based upon some kind of an antipathy, that just puts it in the same world as the Greeks and the Trojans and the Iliad, or the many different forms of animosity, antipathy that Shakespeare built his work on. I don't think that you automatically should have something weaker because it's about the problems of some Jews and some Christians. That people shouldn't say, well, that's not a subject that can beget art, right? And so I think that because race is so complex in America, it allows you an opportunity as a writer to really, really, really do things you haven't seen done before. See, because there are a lot of encounters in this book, from what I can tell, between black people and white people, white women and black women, that I haven't seen written about. But when I talked to a number of women who've read it, they said that's how they actually did think about something, you know.
Right.
That they were actually startled to see the way that they perceive something actually on the page with the psychological and emotional dynamics of as they used to call it, real life. And that's what I wanted to do. See, I wanted to get that the bedeviling complexity of this thing, and also the fact that if you can control the words and the form, you can introduce the reader to things that the reader or thinks he or she already knows, but actually doesn't. You know, like that's the reason why I have that chapter-long section and set in the church, because I know a lot of white people and black people, they'll get to this and, oh, another novel by a Negro with some people in church, you know. But when they get in there, though, something's gonna happen that they didn't expect, you know. See, because one thing I wanted to avoid was that 20th century novel cliche of the religious person who has the dark night of the soul and discovers, because he or she is unhappy, that God must not exist. See, the very worst example of that I ever encountered is a friend whom I wish I had been thinking about when I wrote this book, because he concluded he became an atheist when he was about 9 or 10 because he wanted a BB gun. And he prayed throughout the summer and the fall into winter for a BB gun. And when he didn't get his BB gun, he concluded upon that December 25th that God could not exist. And so he was just kind of a trivial version of what you see in a lot of European novels, and I didn't want to have that. So I didn't want to have. That's why Carlin's character is. That's why she's religious at the start, and she's religious at the end.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't.
Towards the very end, you have a very interesting description of the battle of the sexes, which you talk about men as mask makers. I think you use the word for women as nudists, meaning they want to be known.
Right.
Do you consider yourself an expert on women?
Well, I don't think any man is crazy enough to say that. I mean, even if you had a 700-year-old pimp and a 700-year-old Casanova sitting here, I think both of them would tell you they're too quick for us. You know, you'll never get to know all of it. You know, see, I've seen guys pretend to think that they know everything about women, but they don't really believe that. See, because women are like everything else. It's there, then it's somewhere else. The difference between men and women is that I think women, to me, they're more interested in you actually knowing how they really are. See, to them, I think that their ambition is to find someone who accepts them, their strengths and their weaknesses, and that they don't get demerits for not being perfect. I think that's the way a woman looks at the world, oftentimes.
And men?
Guys don't particularly care whether you know who they really are.
As long as you admire them.
Well, if you admire the mask that they wear, yeah, if they, like I said in the book, the guy goes out, they find the best trees, they chop the trees down, they carve the best mask, they get the most beautiful, kill the most beautiful birds, put the most beautiful feathers on, they find the most beautiful dyes, and they put them on. And then, for the rest of their lives, they want you to admire their mask and appreciate their upkeep. And that's about it. Most guys don't care whether anybody knows who they are. You know, it's very, you know, I mean, people in arts maybe, but the average guy, he doesn't really, particularly with women, oh no. Why? You know, that's what the average guy thinks. What good does it do? You know, I was with some guys once, and the guy said, well, you know, one guy says, you know, my wife knows me better than anybody. It doesn't seem to have done you any good. You know.
Is Maxwell a mask wearer?
Yeah, he is. But but also because he's a musician, he has more. He's more acquainted with being himself in public, you know. But I think we should take a break. I'll be right back.
Should I be taking the break too? You can all take a break. Okay. Were you busy adjusting your mask?
I was busy adjusting my tie. But you know what I realized? We haven't exactly told them what the plot of the book is, have we?
No, although it was accused of having
No plot.
no plot,
Yeah.
which you could rectify. Because I do think certainly it has a plot.
What do you think the plot is?
It's just a test question. Well, in some way to me, the plot seems sort of circular, and I like those kind of plots, not a direct, linear A, B, C, and then what happened. That doesn't seem your primary interest, which is,
No, well, that's true because I designed it. The basic thing is this. So the book opens, the white woman was 38 years old. It's a jazz singer, and she goes to Houston with her black boyfriend, Maxwell. Her name is Carla. 4 years, they've been together, things were great for the first 4 years. The last year has been abominable because since he's become popular, he's fallen under the pressure that a number of successful black guys find themselves under, which is to not have a white girlfriend or white wife. That's largely a black problem. That is to say, the kinds of things that were written about O.J. Simpson and how he was trying to be white and all that business, that he had run away from his people. See, nobody says that about Sylvester Stallone. They don't say, well, what's the last name of that woman that he's with? Doesn't sound Italian to me. You know, see, that the Negro has to deal with that. I mean, even Woody Allen basically has not fallen under that kind of pressure, I don't think. I mean, in other words, people wrote things about O.J. Simpson just on the basis of him being married to Nicole Brown that you could not have written in 1970, that no editor in America would have allowed you to write the kind of insulting attacks on him for being with a woman who wasn't black, that today, because of that's one of the grand ironies of the 60s black power stuff, is it's now so infected white liberals that they feel that, somebody was writing about Simpson and says, Simpson learned to speak like a white man. What does that mean? You know, I mean, so you couldn't have written that you would not have in the New York Times been able to put that in an editorial in 1970. Say that Martin Luther King does not speak like a real Negro. He speaks like a white man. Why? Because he has command of the English language, and we know that a Negro who's real couldn't have command of the English language, you know. How dare him? And so I think that she, through the book, she has to come to grips with the pressures that are on Maxwell that come from among black people.
right.
See, because part of the book is about the fact that you have two black Americas, so-called, and you have two white Americas, so-called. That is to say, there are white people in America who, like Carla's Midwestern parents, believe that you deal with people as individuals and you like them or you don't like them on the basis of that. And you have black people, like Maxwell's parents, who believe exactly the same thing.
Right.
Now, part of the point of the book is that sometimes you have to go back home rather than run away from home, emotionally and psychologically, in order to deal with a problem that's right in front of you. Oftentimes, you know, in the traditional American story, you realize yourself by running away from home, because home is too provincial, it's too restrictive, it's too something, so you have to go somewhere else. Now, Maxwell and Carla moved to New York because they their artistic ambitions, his as a saxophonist and hers as a singer, are best served by New York City. But both of them, when they really have to deal with a very deep personal problem, they have to go back to how they were reared. They have to go back to their parents. They have to go back to that, good old American common sense that's not sentimental.
Right.
See, the thing is that Maxwell's parents and Carla's parents are not sentimental. It's like what's that when Carla's mother tells her that her mother says that the reason you can see into the distance is because of all of these femurs and skulls and rib cages that you're standing upon, of all these people who died valiantly or not to make the country what it is. So she doesn't have any sentimental idea about it. And I think that one of the big problems we have in American life today is that we feel that any pride or embracing of our American traditions is in some way an expression of being naive.
Right, true.
It's like I remember when I was a kid, the guy explained something to me about women. He said, man, look, let me explain something. I was saying something about all these women, they're so... He said, man, they're not like that. He said, they change diapers. He said, you know what that is? He said, try to figure out a way to be like that, changing a diaper. He said, you can't do that. He said, they do all kind of things. He said, they can put one finger on a baby's nose, blow in its mouth, and let the snot hit them on put a thing. He said, they do all of that. He said, now then they'll sit up and, He said, that's for you, that ain't for them. That's to make you feel comfortable. He said, but they face all of that. So they face the sickness, they face the beginning of life, if they have babies, he said they experience carrying the child, they experience the pain of the delivery, they go through all of that stuff, and then they sit there and they act as though, as they used to say in the old days, butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. He said, but that's for you. It's not for them. So believe me, when they're together, they're not talking like that to each other.
Right. I thought the conversations between women in the book are particularly well done. The conversation when Carla goes into the bathroom and there are two black women who are talking to each other and she sort of hides in the toilet.
Right.
The conversation between the two sisters, found those very well done. Someone asked me if you were a misogynist, which I found a strange question, because in many ways it seems to me, which I would say is a rarity in, I don't want to use such an auspicious phrase as American letters. You seem to I sensed a lot of affection for women, which I don't, for instance, sense in Philip Roth, even in Saul Bellow. There's a lot of sort of distaste, discomfort, none of which I sensed in this book. I mean, I thought there was, one of your strengths is you seem curious about women, which if one wanted to make an autobiographical link, which I know you don't particularly like, I thought did have to do with your own relationship with your mother. I mean, I don't want to reduce it in the...
I guess in a certain sense, but see, I was always, when I look back on it as a writer, see, I was always very lucky because even when I was a teenager, women would always tell me things, They'd always tell me things. I never could figure out why. I mean, now that I finished the book, I know why. That I was given the luck to be able to get stockpile all this stuff. And I found out too very early that if you actually were interested in what a woman thought and felt about something, 7 to 9 out of 10 times she would actually tell you. You know, if she didn't think you were going to try to use what she told you to belittle her somewhere else or to put her, you know, on the gossip circuit or whatever it was. And that was when I began to believe, well, I began to discover what I now believe, which was that females are much more interested in being perceived emotionally and psychologically the way they really are, you know. See, because most of them, that whole thing about feel good about yourself, I don't know what that is. That, I mean, I think that the breadth and the depth of the souls of people creates these enormous forms of expression, and if you pay attention, you learn a lot of things. But one of the things you learn most, which is one of the things that the book is about, is that people can endure stuff. They can prevail through their pain without being disfigured by it. See, like Carla has to go through a lot of things. She suffers a lot of different kinds of ways, but she's not disfigured by what happens to her. And I think that as Americans at large, we haven't been disfigured. See, I think the worst thing that ever happens to you is when you think you actually were supposed to get something better than what you got. You know, like just to finish out, because I'm sure that note is telling us we're supposed to let you all start asking us questions now. There's this joke that this woman takes her son to the rabbi, and she says, "Rabbi, I have a very terrible problem." The rabbi says, "A terrible problem? You have a terrible problem. What is the terribleness of this problem?" She says, "It's about my son." This boy here? She says, "Yes, him." She says, "Oh, I've known that boy from the very, very beginning. He always seemed to be all right to me. What's wrong with him now?" She says, "Rabbi, can I actually tell you?" He says, "Believe me, you can tell me." She says, "I'm actually embarrassed." He says, "With me, you needn't be embarrassed." She says, "Okay, my son, he does not believe in God." And so the rabbi leans over to the boy and puts his face very, very close to the boy's face, almost so close that their noses are touching. And the rabbi looks directly in the boy's eyes and he says, "Does he think God cares?" So, shall we go at it?
Yep. Since that was the nature of the note, yes.
Now we'll take questions, as they say. Yes, ma'am.
I remember, I've watched 60 Minutes for a long time. They had point counterpoint. Then they dropped it. That was Shane Alexander. And then they resuscitated it. And I believe you came on it.
That's true.
You're the only one I can remember. Because I think they alternated between two people. You and Wally Imus.
That's true.
And then they dropped it again.
They did.
Anyway, that's the statement. Two little questions. In your various panel discussions, who has been your most sort of curmudgeonly panelist that has either gotten your vote or they got you've given the vote to them?
Oh, that would be very hard to say at this point.
You're usually the goat giver. It's a role.
I don't get headaches, I give them. The second question is, the latest new program is the West Wing, about the West Wing of the White House. It's on Wednesdays at 9 o'clock. I don't know if you've ever written any scripts for TV or movies, but if you were asked, would you write a script for the West Wing?
idea, to tell you the truth. I'm working on a screenplay with my daughter right now about Beauty and the Beast today, about a girl who's with a beast, and she's trying to transform him into a person. Well, he's a person who thinks he should be. He's not actually a beast. He's a person who thinks he should be a beast. And so she's trying to convince him that he doesn't need to be a beast. And so that's what we're working on right now. But if they called me and if they offered me enough money and I thought I could do it well, and if I didn't think I could do it well, if I could do it without using my name, I would be happy to write it. Yeah, right. No, if I thought I couldn't do it well, I would try to get the money without using my name. See, that's what I mean. If I thought I could do it well, believe me, I'd love for them to say. But if the check was big enough and I thought I could do it and call myself, Braxton Davis or something, Bob Miller, Cleveland Tom, something like that. I'd do it, yeah. Yeah, if you see Cleveland Tom, yeah, right, you'll know it's me, right.
I just think it's a very well-written show.
Yeah, I've never seen it, but I'm sure you're right.
9 o'clock Wednesdays, you may have the president on one side, it's a little left in the middle. But the cast is very good, the different types of the staff of the White House, mainly about the staff.
Right.
I'm expressing I haven't read the book yet, but I definitely intend to. And I guess I'm not as surprised, perhaps by the review that you chose a white middle-aged woman to write about. I mean, it's your job as the author. I mean, it's much like people when they land a plane and everybody claps. I always wonder why they're clapping, because the pilot's job is to land the plane safely. Maybe your job is to create characters and have us fall in love with them and feel what they're feeling. And my question is probably more that having chosen that person as your main character, did you base it on any women that you know?
Oh yeah, all of them.
And moreover, were you hoping that this would perhaps engender more conversations where people speak plainly about being American and really the problems that probably interracial couples might encounter, or just people interacting with one another who may whatever race, color, or creed?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, see, see, when I was a kid, I always I was a big Western fan, and I always liked that part when the guy pulled the sword out and did this and said, "Charge." I didn't care whether they got there or not, but I always liked that moment when all those beautiful horses are standing there, their heads are going up and down at different speeds, at different rhythms, and then this guy goes, and then when they hit the, I always liked that. And one of the things I do hope that this book does is that it breaks free of what I consider a very segregated aspect of American fiction. That is, if Jews write about Jews, Irish write about Irish, women write about women, black people write about black people, etc. However, right. However, many people normally live in buildings with black people. Their wives and husbands and kids run in the people of all kinds of different backgrounds at the gym, at the bar, jogging, at hockey games, at baseball games, etc. Then these same people go home and sit down and write as though none of that takes place. And so I'm hoping that if this book is successful, that writers will say, well, why not? See, I'll say this. I don't think that there's any white character written by, any black character written by any white person that's on the scale of this woman that's written in this book. I don't think that's impossible. I just think people don't try it. You know, I think if Saul Bellow decided, for instance, to write a novel about a character like Harold Washington, the mayor, the late mayor of Chicago, I think he could bring it off. You know, I think he could bring it off if he wanted to do it. But see, I think also that you see that this franchise that's come in, where nobody is supposed to be able to know anything about other people because these ethnic and sexual and even sexual point of view franchises are there in place. People they hide from it. So in this book, I was gonna break all of it up. I got, you know, Maxwell's brother, Baby Aaron, is a homosexual. Happily, you know, he's not a homosexual who's, you know, has tormented by the fact that he likes men. You know, at one point, Maxwell is talking to him. He said, "Somebody took advantage of you, didn't he?" He said, "Actually, no. He said, at first I thought I was a girl, but then later on I found out I wasn't a girl. I was a guy who liked guys." He said, and whatever problem I had, it was when I didn't know that a guy could like a guy. He said, after that, fine, you know. So he doesn't have, so we don't have the tortured homosexual, you know, monologue of, you know, but if they could only accept me, so he doesn't go through that. I mean, he likes what he is. You know, and then on the other side, there are, Daphne and I were talking about this on the phone today. I mean, it is a portrait of these very wealthy people at one point when Carla gets involved with this Anglo-Irish stockbroker, and she goes into that world of, you know, the horsey set, as they call them, you know. And at first she thinks they're kind of opaque, but then she discovers that they too are people. You know, they may not be the kind of people you want to be around all the time, and they may be the kind of people you want to be around all the time. But they are people. They're not statistics or abstractions. And what I was hoping was to make her kind of sort of an Odysseus kind of character, you know. See, because in a certain sense, Carla is both Penelope and Odysseus. She's both the wanderer and the person who keeps the home in condition. And see, near the end of the book, there's this moment when we look at Winnie Mandela, who was a real Penelope, and she beat the one of myth by 7 years. Because Odysseus' Penelope waits for him for 20 years. Winnie Mandela waited for Nelson Mandela for 27 years. But then she becomes something else. And then the way that it's told, Mandela himself, Nelson Mandela, becomes both Penelope and Odysseus. And one of the things, that's one of the things I was trying to do throughout the book, is that the black person becomes the white person, the woman becomes the man. Not in terms of sexual identity, I don't mean that. I mean that the humanity that we associate with one group or another is sometimes interchangeable. And it's sometimes when you come in contact with something else, that form of humanity intensifies who you are. So hopefully, if I've done a good job of it, I'll actually be the guy pulling the sword and saying, charge, and maybe I won't be out there on the horse by myself. You never know. You know. Yes, sir.
Along those lines, I'm curious if one were to agree with what you said, which I'm not sure I do, that I think you said that you think women want to be emotionally understood, that is more important to them than it is for men. If that's true, why do you think it is?
Oh, that's something I haven't, that's something, well, see, I think that part of it is that well, I tell you, one time I was studying the male in nature, and I noticed over and over that there are exceptions, but basically males, elephants, lions, they're pretty much like guys. You know, they'd rather be with each other most of the time. Or by themselves. You know, I used to think that when you see those herds of elephants, those are almost always female elephants and the calves, because the males are wandering around by themselves, you know, running into each other head first. And then, you know, come mating season, they come around, and they stay around for a little while, and then they head back out. And I just think I think it could be. Now again, since there are 5 billion people on the face of the earth, there are 5 billion variations on anything. So I don't mean that all guys aren't like that, but I do believe this, and that's part of what the book is about, is that the civilizing tendencies tend to come from the females. That doesn't mean, and a lot of it, I mean, because I remember I was reading about, I was reading Borston's books, those 4 books, The Americans, and see what he found out is one of the reasons the guys in the West didn't like women coming west, except for prostitutes, was that when they came west, they started saying, you know, I really don't like all that noise of these gunfire in the street. Do we have to have that? Well, I mean, you know, this is the West, guys like to shoot guns. Well, I don't like these guns going off in the street. So eventually, the women pressure the guys, and they get a marshal, and the marshal comes out there. No more gunfire in the street. You know, I don't like all these guys wandering around drunk, throwing things all over, tearing everything up, etc. Yeah, but these guys are cowboys. They just, you know, they're just blowing off steam. Yeah, but you know, why can't they blow off steam in camp? All right, no drunken, disorderly behavior. All right, can we have some glass in the window, not just a hole in the wall? All right, and on it goes. I mean, he's got Borston in one of the volumes, he's got a whole section in which he just describes one by one the things, how that women were as much the tamers of the West as anything, because they just weren't gonna buy it. You know, and then that whole idea that you could, then there's that other one. You could take a bath, couldn't you? You could do that. Well, I've been out, I'm used to being out there 3 or 4 months without taking a bath. Yes, but you're with mostly guys when you're doing that. Would you, right? So now, this, I think these elements, see, people have hit, the Hollywood guys figured that out a long time ago, you know, because there are many different, there are many comedies and westerns, etc., that are about that these guys are having a rowdy, anarchic, good time, and then these women get off the stagecoach, they come in on the wagon trains, and then they begin to try to make these guys act like adults.
A lot of cowboys became cowboys apparently to leave urban areas because they were dead.
Oh, some of them were? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, some of them were. I mean, the basic thing is where better be a homosexual than in a boys' school, or the military, or a cattle drive, you know. I mean, after all, you know what I mean? After all, you know, particularly, yeah, there's a whole, that's always a part of it. You get a bunch of guys, eventually some of them are gonna go to bed with each other. You know, maybe more than we would think would, but very rarely you're going to have that much testosterone within, I don't want to say striking distance, but or let's say touching distance. And eventually some sparks of some sort are not going to go off. And see that, and so in the book, that's one of the things that I try to look at too, is that when we go into Baby Aaron's world, that world has its for him, it has its great joys and it has its horrors, because he sees a lot of things in the S&M bars and stuff in the early 70s that he finds disgusting, and that he also doesn't think have anything to do with homosexuality. He thinks they have to do with something else, you know. And so part of the point of the book is that if you study your group long enough, you're going to find something in your group that is absolutely reprehensible to you. You know, it has nothing to do with self-hatred, somebody else's standards being imposed upon you. It's going to be something that you look at. I don't like that. And I don't think that's essential to us being who we are. You know. Yes, ma'am? Oh, I think there's enormous progress. I mean, for instance, you have, see, there are a lot of things we have to do. True, you always will have these periodic disruptions of these lunatics, like these guys in Montana and Wyoming and out there, right? Now, out there might be around the corner from here. You never know. We may find out that there's some cell of the white Aryan resistance inside a townhouse around there. That could be too. I mean, that's not, because, when you study the Third Reich, those guys like Goering and Hitler, they live in shacks. I mean, or trailer camps. I mean, they had big fireplaces and beautiful, being that kind of a person is not determined by a certain kind of social position. But I think when you look at things such as, you take a guy like Latrell Sprewell, right? What does he do? 2 years ago, he gets in an argument with his coach. He chokes him, right? Then he leaves, comes back, punches him up some more, and tells him, "I'll kill you," right? But for the last 2 years, on the Knicks, he's played so brilliantly, now he's almost a local folk hero. Now, we've got, in most big cities in America, you've got a black mayor, male or female. The majority of the constituency electorate is not white. You've got black people all over the country in all kinds of different positions that are far beyond what they were when I was a kid. I mean, I tell kids this often when I go speak at black schools. So I said, look, when in 1960, you turned on the television in the wonderful Kennedy era, I said, white guys did everything. White guys did everything. White guys in dark suits and dark ties, they did everything. They did all of the news. They had all of the cabinet positions. They were all of the people on the Supreme Court. They were all of the mayors of the big cities. They were all the governors of all the states. They were all the people in the president's cabinet. They were all the people who told you about the weather. They did all the reporting. They were it. The white man was happening then. I mean, I'm sure some white men are thinking that those were the good old days, when you turn on TV and you didn't see nothing but a white man, So now, it's totally unlike that. I mean, you've got black women, you've got white women, you've got black guys, you got white guys, you got Asians, you got Latins, etc. They're talking about the stock market. They're talking about foreign policy. They're anchors. They talk about medicine. They analyze everything. And so for a person like me who was involved in the civil rights movement to look at America now, I think that we've made enormous. And I mean, it's Oprah Winfrey. You know, people always try to dismiss her. Like, well, she's just an updated Aunt Jemima. Well, you know, I think Hattie McDaniels wouldn't have minded being like that in 1939. She'd have taken that job. You know, so it's just I don't think, you know. So I think that people, I think that the reality of American life is different from the political rhetoric of American life. And the political rhetoric is based upon exaggerating the degree of victimization rather than doing what was very important when King and those people were which was to try to get Americans to see that all of our problems are collective. That if a black kid gets shot on a school campus in Chicago, that's the problem of Chicago, not the problem of the black people on the south side of Chicago. You know, that was what made the civil rights movement what it was. And I'll never forget when those 4 little girls were blown up in that church in September of 1963. That shook this country in a way that I had never seen anything before or since. Because at that point, white Americans, as much as anybody else, said, wait a minute, has it gotten to that? That people will blow up little kids because people are trying to register to vote? That's their great sin? And I mean, to realize that just within 3 years, black power had come forward and white people were being kicked out of the civil rights movement. See, so I think it's just as accountable. That was a great tragedy because there was a national grieving for those families and for those kids. It was really remarkable. And I think it spoke of the degree to which Americans are capable of identifying across lines. And see, I remember too, in 1960, when they snatched Eichmann and took him back to Israel. And my mother and all these people, all they talked about were Jews in World War II for months upon months. And they would always say, well, we got problems here with these white folks. We got some hell of a problems. But that stuff that happened over there, there's nothing like that that's ever happened. Now, of course, today, there's a victim sweepstakes kind of. So we never know. It's like somebody will say, well, the Jewish Holocaust was worse, and then somebody said, no, the Holocaust of the American Indian, I think that's got a little bit ahead. Then somebody will say, no, all those Africans that died in the Middle Passage, they're at the turn now. 60 million Africans, they're forging ahead. So we're kind of like that instead of saying all of those Holocausts are all of our Holocausts. See, nobody owns that. Jews don't own the death camps. All of us own the death camps. That's part of our heritage as people. All of us own the killing fields. All of us own Rwanda. All of us own Wounded Knee. All of us own the Civil War. That's our human story collectively. And anytime we fail to recognize that could be us, either on the receiving end or on the giving end, that's when you become narcissistic enough to be manipulated by somebody into doing something terrible. Because usually the way those people manipulate you is they tell you, you're so superior to these other people. You are so much better than them, so much more sensitive that it's okay for you to slaughter them because you're a more sensitive person. See, people that insensitive, they don't really suffer quite as badly as you think they do. when they're slaughtered. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do as writers in the United States is just to knock all these lanes out of the way, you know, so that because one person was there asking me, they said, well, don't you feel more when you see these people slaughtered in Rwanda than you do in somewhere else, somewhere in Eastern Europe? I said, are you crazy? No. Why would I care more about a child being murdered in Cambodia than I would a child being murdered in Rwanda because one looks more like another group of people? No, I'm not like that. And I don't think any of us should be like that. And I don't mean either that we're supposed to be, everybody's just supposed to become, well, I'm just Mr. Everyman. I don't have no identity. I don't mean that either. I mean, you come from where you come from. But where you start and what you become are based upon you. And see, as Americans, we have constantly pushed the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the possibility of fair treatment, closer and closer to the ideal. You know, and it doesn't make any difference who the guys were who started the country, whether they had slaves or not. You know, we as American people have taken those things forward. And Don't the Moon Look Lonesome is often about how that happens symbolically with individuals, with black women and white women, with black men and white men, with white people and black people, with Jews and Irish people, and people on the south side of Chicago, and the upper class of Connecticut, and working in expensive restaurants and in cheap restaurants, and being on bandstands and all of that. That's what the book is about. Peter.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question. You make reference to the Hollywood boys and the creation of these stories with universality and all that. When I asked you about the book and the potential for a movie, but before I do, I really want to comment about something you stated earlier that I'm not sure is really totally accurate. And that's your take about black writers, white writers, women, and who live around certain people, but they don't write these people. And I don't really, you know, when you think about Stephen King and Frank Darabont, who translated his short story and directed it into Shawshank Redemption, and Morgan Freeman character, which is brilliantly done. Michael Moyer is a sitcom writer who co-created Love and Marriage. Anne Rice has one of the great books, is Peace for All Saints, which is the 19th century Haitian, and mulattoes in New Orleans. Michael Sandler is a white English teacher at Kent School in Connecticut. Robert Armstrong, the late great Robert Armstrong. I can go on and on with references of people, writers of different genders and colors that cross all of those lines and still create and write terrific characters. And you certainly did your novel. I read the book, as you know, and big fan of the book. I think the characters are great. But I just wasn't quite in total agreement about your take on it.
Oh, no, I don't mean that never happens, Peter. In fact, one of the things that's most fascinating about it, about our country, is that the people who write for television and who write for the movies are often ahead of the novel. That is to say, that a television series like Homicide says what? There are all kinds of different black people, all kinds of different women, all kinds of different, et cetera. There are very few American novels that deal with the level of psychological, personal, environmental complexity that have become fairly common in the best of television drama. That's not something you tend to expect. With shows like ER and many others, going all the way back to Hill Street Blues, I would imagine. I think that's the breakthrough one, where you had so many different variations of each kind of ethnic type. It was as though they sat down and said, okay, by the time we get out of here, we're going to have 20 different kinds of Jews, and people are going to see 20 different kinds of Italians, Black Americans, et cetera, so that so that you may start with that surface, but you find out after a while that inside that, like everything else, are these endless variations. And so I would agree with you that yes, there are people, but I don't think that's basically the situation in the world of writing. In the world of writing. And the reason, and one of the reasons is you're never gonna get black actors to support black politicians, right, saying that these white people who are employing them on these television shows shouldn't have these white writers writing these characters. So that's never gonna happen. You know, whereas you've had in the literary world what happened, the problem began with William Styron's Confessions of Nat Turner, because he was so powerfully attacked for even having the nerve to write about a black hero that I think in fact, I have an essay that may be published in the New York Review of Books in which I examine that whole controversy. And I think that's where the problem I'm talking about began. Not that certain people haven't broken out of it, but there was such an intense reaction to him. As though, well, yeah, well, they're trying to sell it. They're trying to sell it. I think we'll take one more question if there is one more. Aha. Oh, there are two more, so I'll have to let each of you ask a question. You first. Yes, the man in the white shirt.
I hope I'm not changing the subject too much.
I hope so too.
I'm a supervisor in the police department, and we as cops, we have demoralizing experience pretty much of getting to read every day about how evil we are and about how we're despised by everyone around us. And we also pretty much realize that a lot of the way that our work is portrayed in the media doesn't have a lot of relationship to what really goes on. And a lot of us read your column. Your column means a lot to a lot of us. Not so much because you're always 100% for us, which you're not, but just because of the incredible fairness that you bring when you write about police community relations, and also the fact that you're one of the few, if not the only person in the media who really seems to understand what's going on in the streets and what's going on in the city. And first of all, I want to thank you for that. Your column is like pure oxygen when it comes to water. But also, I wonder, do you get a lot of feedback and do you get a lot of flack for speaking up a little bit on the other side of, I mean, the media is filled with cop editors and you're a little.
Oh yeah, they call me. I'm referred to routinely as an apologist for the police. But see, the biggest problem you have is that people who write about the police are not interested in knowing what happens with the police. See, my biggest complaint to this very day is that Howard Safer has not opened up the academy and the shooting range and the various exercises that cops go through to actually find out what that is. Because I'd be willing to bet you that a lot of the people who most intensely attack the police would not go because they don't want to know. Secondarily, I think, and it's something that I hope to examine in some fiction up the road, is the fact that people don't understand that that cops hate other cops who create an animosity towards the NYPD. Because every cop who's out there knows that if he or she ever gets in a life-threatening situation, and some jerk or a number of jerks have done things that have so alienated the community from the cops that these people might see the cops in a life-threatening situation and not even feel it their duty to pick up the phone and just say 911, cops in trouble at such and such a place. So I think that the biggest I have a section in here about the police, because at one point they live over a bar that cops go in, and the character Carla at first is repulsed by the police and by the female cops, whom she feels that everybody in there seems like they're men. And then after a while, she gets to realize that the female cops are women too, and that the cops are the way that they are because they've come to find out that, this priest, has sexually abused these little boys, these little girls, and this person who's a very respected person in the community has committed some kind of a terrible set of crimes. So the police are people who function from a sense of duty and disappointment in a certain sense. The average cop, as you well know, becomes fairly disappointed in his species after a certain amount of time. But at the same time, because of what I consider the noble side of the people who are cops, they also understand that the innocent need to be protected. And I think that that sense of what actually is going on in police work, and the fact that people in the media don't address that at all, is really despicable to me. And as you know, people like Volpe, Lavodi, and bad cops are bad cops. But I think that when people in New York talk about the police, I feel like they use the same logic that anti-Semites use, that racists use, is that they'll take a Meyer Lansky or Bugsy Siegel, and that's Jews. They'll take John Gotti, and that's Italians. The kind of things that they say about cops routinely, you couldn't write that about a racial group. You couldn't do it. You couldn't say, well, since black people, since 50% of the murders every year in New York are committed by black people, then black people obviously are only half as civilized as everybody else in New York. You couldn't say that. You couldn't say that, but if you have X amount of cases of some cops doing something in a stop and frisk, then the NYPD is like that. And that's why I hate that. Yes, sir. It's our final one. All right, guys, we're letting you go. These guys back there, they're starting
Rumble.
they've worn out their soles of their shoe, moving them back and forth like that. Here and there. They're back there going, my God, when are we leaving?
Well, let's see if we can get just one comment on the general subject. You probably touched on a little bit during the evening. I'm worried specifically about the cultural war that's been going on over the past 50 years. In the 250 years of our country, maybe the first 150, culture was pretty much even keel. All the people coming into the country adjusted to us, adjusted to our culture, the American culture. Now we have, over the past 50 years, as I see it, rich against poor, black against white, Asians against non-Asians, and it seems to be engendered by the press, by various media, and I'd like your take on that.
Well, you have to remember that between 1850 and 1900, that's when the Irish became white. As they said, there's a book called How the Irish Became White, because the Irish were kind of in a photo finish with us when they got here, you know, as far as the way the other white people looked at them. So we have to remember that, you see, there was a lot of hostility between the Irish and the Italians. The Jews came, right? The people in the Eastern Seaboard. That was a big mess. And a lot of the mess got resolved to some extent by World War I, because it sort of created a kind of a national sense. And then when those Irish crooks took power in those big cities, and they learned how to be what, in my novel, a guy calls high-quality corruption as opposed to low-quality corruption. That is, high-quality corruption means you steal as much as you can, but you get the job done. Low-quality corruption means you steal and you don't get the job done. So it's, so one kind of a crook helps you to build a civilization, another one gets in the way of the civilization developing. Now, those kinds of things took place between the end of the Civil War, the turn of the century, of World War I. I think all we're in now is just this period where these people are just being, they're just being absorbed. See, you can't, the one thing to finally close, I said, you cannot stop somebody from becoming an American. I was on a plane with these people from the Middle East who were having a kosher meal. They were dressed, they were grandparents, they were, I think they were Iranian. They were Iranian. You will not stop me from being an Iranian. But they had their two granddaughters were sitting behind them, and they of course had on jeans as tight as this desk. They had T-shirts, right? Tennis shoes untied, and they were listening to this something, and they were back there into that. Now, believe me, in that household, I'm sure they've been taught as much Islam as they could be taught, as much about their family as they could, etc. But it's just that, the call of the wild, this American life, you can't stop it. Thank you very much. Sorry, guys.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.